In today's show, it's a mailbag episode answering questions about Damian Lillard, Nassir Little versus Cam Reddish, and how many Blazers currently on the roster are still going to stick around next year. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making the show your first listen. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's episode, it's a mailbag episode answering listener-submitted questions all episode long. We got questions about Damian Lillard's cryptic tweets, Nassir Little versus Cam Reddish, and how many Blazer players are likely to stick around in the future. If you want to get involved in a mailbag episode, lockedonblazerspod@gmail.com is an email address. Send me an email, lockedonblazerspod@gmail.com. That email will be in the episode description for this episode. But again, lockedonblazerspod@gmail.com. That's where your fellow listeners have sent me their questions, including Tim, who asks, after last night's game, and I'm recording this, it's a little late. I'm recording this on Friday morning, but this was after Wednesday's game against the Sacramento Kings. After Wednesday's game against the Sacramento Kings, question from Tim, Damian Lillard tweeted, "This is way bigger than Nino Brown," in response to someone asking why he wasn't playing. I know it's not the offseason quite yet, but do you think Dame is hinting at some news coming? I followed up with Tim. Tim was born in 1995. Tim was not alive when the classic film New Jack City was released in 1991, and I'm going to assume that Tim wasn't watching daytime television in the 90s when New Jack City was playing all of the time on daytime TV. Otherwise, Tim would have been familiar with the quote, "This is bigger than Nino Brown." It is a classic courtroom scene in which Nino Brown, played by Wesley Snipes, takes the stand and explains, "This is bigger than Nino Brown. This is big business. This is America." In response to questions about whether he runs a violent and bloody drug crime ring, Nino Brown explains that he shouldn't be the scapegoat, or he is merely the product of a broken system. He is simply functioning within the broken world in which the sort of like American prison complex, Americans like criminal complex has forced him to live because of not keeping guns off the streets, or keeping, I believe he references poppies and the heroin trade and all of these things. Like, Nino Brown is saying that he's not the scapegoat or the culprit. He is merely a part of a broken system. And that is my read on what Damian Lillard says with this cryptic tweet. A couple Twitter users asked him, "Why are you not playing? Why aren't you playing? Why, like, you're fine." And another Twitter user says, like, "You think it's his choice? He has to that he gets to play. This is a decision made above his head." And Damian Lillard says, "This is bigger than Nino Brown. He is a product of a broken system." That is my read on what he's saying. A couple thoughts here. Yeah, like, Dame's right. This is a broken system. It is not his fault that the organization for which he plays chose to field a team that was intentionally not competitive enough to make it into the higher parts of the playoffs, the upper echelon of the playoff seeding. The folks that make the decision and built this roster did not put together a competitive enough roster in order to be one of the top 5-6 seeds in the playoffs. However, they probably built a competitive enough roster to be something like 500 and be right in the play-in range, and the Blazers have underachieved. And because they've underachieved, they've had to make this decision where they've pulled the plug. And they're resting guys on purpose, and they're signing players to hardship contracts. A little bit of news here. The Blazers announced, in addition to Skylar Mays, they've also added 29-year-old guard Shaquille Harrison joins the roster. I guess legally they cannot sign someone taller than 6'5". It's incredibly funny that they only sign guards, but they need guards. Like, they need ball handlers, because Arcidiacono it sounds like he's, with the back stuff, he could be out for a while. Cam Reddish has a back injury. Trent Watford's still with the ankle problem. Keon Johnson has a fractured finger, albeit of unknown specificity. So, yeah, like they're just missing guards, so it's not a problem. But like they have Damian Lillard and Anthony Simons who are nursing injuries or just straight up much more likely being held out on purpose, and the Blazers are having to sign players to hardship waivers for hardship they created of their own. They decided to go this route. It strikes me as, I guess, amoral that Damian Lillard would only play 58 games this season and sit out, 10 or so because of 10 roughly because of the team's decision to do this. It's true. This is bigger than Nino Brown. This is big business. This is America. This is the NBA. This is a league in which there's incentives for organizations to tank. I do not think the Blazers are doing the wrong thing. I just think it's kind of despicable that this is the right thing. No, honestly, no real fault of the Blazers, although I think there is some moral high ground to be gained by just playing out the season with your roster, but tanking is the right thing to do. And the worst part about it is that it's the right thing to do. That to me is the biggest bummer. So I don't think Damian Lillard is hinting at anything. I think Damian Lillard is just quoting a wonderful movie from 1991, New Jack City. You should check it out. Wesley Snipes is incredible in the film. He's really, really good. It's Nino Brown. It's maybe not appropriate for children, so if you're listening to this with your kids, wait till they get a little bit older. There's a lot of, there's some violence and drug use and nudity. But yeah, it was on TV. Find the television edit, and it's pretty good. This isn't Dame hinting at anything. I think this is Dame explaining that this decision is beyond him. It strikes me, like there is a whole like Damian Lillard trade industrial complex that is played out by the national media, particularly those at ESPN that are just like, they want to get it. If the Blazers make the sort of news cycle, they make the news cycle in the free Dame, #FreeDame, all caps talk. Like there's no other discussion of the Blazers beyond like they gotta let Damian Lillard go. He deserves better than this. And like he has said a million times he wants to be here. I'm not really going to like get deep into the Damian Lillard trade industrial complex. That's for others to do. I don't even know that I can get worked up and yell at ESPN about it. I find it boring mostly. I find it's like, oh, okay, this is what we're talking about. Like it's just like it's probably not going to make the show because I find it boring. But this particular tweet and parsing Dame tweets is also a little bit boring. So it's like I want to I know I'm part of the problem a little bit, but like this can't happen again. The Blazers have kind of exhausted their ability to do this. Last year, Damian Lillard's hurt, has surgery, super tank, makes sense. This year, they, at the beginning of the year, they were pretty clear that we're not good enough yet, but they weren't saying we're going to be bad. They underachieved, and then they had to go in this direction. They don't have the leeway to do this again with Damian Lillard. Instead of tweeting out cryptic Nino Brown quotes, he's probably going to be saying free. Like there's a certain point when you can no longer, the patience will wear itself out. There will be no more space for patience. And Damian Lillard, he's earned the right to say, hey, now it's time for urgency. And he's earned the right to say, yo, I'm part of a broken system. The Blazers are doing this. And I'm sure he's frustrated by it. I'm sure he is. In fact, he was on Casey Holdall's The Briefcase podcast, kind of discussing his position. He didn't specifically talk about tanking and watching, but he, like, in terms of, like, this stinks, but he did address the situation that the Blazers are in. So I recommend you checking that out. But Tim, I will recommend to you that you check out New Jack City. I know it came out a little bit after you were born, but I think it's a film you might enjoy. In the second segment, we got questions about Nassir Little and Cam Reddish. Weirdly enough, 4 different people sent me a question that was about Nassir Little and Cam Reddish. We will talk about those two in the second segment, but first, let me tell you about FanDuel. There's no better time to sign up for FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, when you sign up, you can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. All you got to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Listen, FanDuel is an app that's super simple to use, super safe, super intuitive, and you can bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who scores the most points in the first quarter, super granular. So don't miss your shot on the no sweat first bet. Go check it out. get up to $1,000 back when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. All right. Let's keep it rolling with more mailbag questions. This was weirdly the theme of the week. Questions from Noah and Kari and Canuter and Michael B, all asking varying degrees of questions about Cam Reddish. Noah asks, my question is, what are the Blazers going to do with Cam Reddish? Kari asks, there were screams to start Nassir Little at the beginning of the season, but what role do you see him playing next season, if any, if the Blazers expect to be a competitive playoff series? Canuter asks, I would like your take on Cam Reddish versus Nassir Little. And Michael B asks a very similar question, Canuter, of the Cam Reddish versus Nassir Little, and I think for whatever reason, this is in the zeitgeist. Cam Reddish versus Nassir Little, North Carolina versus Duke, back on the main stage here at Locked On Blazers. Yeah, like, they're not versus each other. I don't even think their skill sets are so similar such that they couldn't play a cajillion minutes together, and I don't think you even have to decide. I think Nas can play a variety of wing positions. I think Cam Reddish can play a variety of wing positions. Neither of them is like the sort of physical, hard rebounding power forward that the Blazers sort of need, but both of them have some skills. Reddish is pretty inconsistent, very inconsistent. Let's just call it what it is. But when it pops, the skill set is really valuable. He has some defensive chops. At 6'8", he can really move his feet, and he's got long arms, and he seems to have a sort of a good sense of where to be when he's locked in. He can dribble, like he can really handle at his size and get himself to the rim. He's good at finishing around the rim with his left hand. He can shoot a little bit with his feet set, like a varied skill set. He's got a little bit of playmaking chops with some passing off the bounce. Like, he's got some skills. And then he has nights where he just absolutely disappears, where it's like, is Cam Reddish still on the roster? Right? Like, why did he go 0 for 3 scoreless with 2 rebounds in 19 minutes? Like, where was he in this game? Nassir Little, when he's on, he's had some nights where he's been really special. He's morphed into a really special shooter, but he hasn't developed a lot of skills outside of that, as Kari laments in his question. Nas, not much of a ball handler, not much of a passer, can really shoot it, but hasn't gotten the sort of downhill slashing ability that maybe you expected from someone with his athleticism. While he's shown some ability to be in the past to be an on-ball defender, he's never really figured out the defensive concept as a team defender. And this year, I think even his on-ball defense has waned a little bit, and he's been inconsistent too. There's nights when it's like, yeah, okay, the shooting's there. He's putting a little together. He's playing really hard. You love the sort of like force he plays with. There's nights where it's like Nassir Little went 0 for 4 from 3 and 1 of 7 from the floor, and he played 26 minutes and had 3 points. Consistency is the name of the game for every player in the NBA. It's hard to be consistent at this level, and both Nas and Cam Reddish struggle with consistency. Nassir Little signed an extension this offseason, or before this offseason, signed it this season. That is one of the truly rare contract extensions you'll ever see from a first-round pick in the league. He signed a multi-year deal worth well below the mid-level money, before hitting free agency, before playing like real games this year. He kind of just said, listen, I want the comfort of a multi-year deal. I want the comfort of the money. And while like I know that there's way more money to be had out there, this will allow me sort of my peace of mind to know that I have some stability here. And I don't think Cam Reddish is going to make as much money as Nas did. Like, I think Cam is like maybe a minimum guy if he returns. Like, I don't think he's been consistent with any production at any stop to be that he would get deep investment. Now, he was a really, really highly touted high school player. There were moments in his rookie season in Atlanta where he was showing flashes, and there's moments here when he's showing flashes. It only takes one team to pay Cam Reddish, but I don't think he's making $5, $6, $7, $8 million a year on a multi-year contract. He might, but I think he's much more likely to sign a single-year minimum deal with a chance to prove it. That said, both of these gentlemen could come back for the Blazers, but if you are trying to field a team that is highly competitive for the playoffs, I don't think you can pencil either of these dudes into your top 8. I think they can be your 9th and 10th guy, but right now, for what they've shown and the consistency they've shown, I don't think on a team that like wins a playoff series in the West, which you would be like, the playoffs are coming soon. They're going to be a lot of fun. Like the teams that win a playoff series that get out of the first round, those are really good basketball teams. Like it's hard. It is hard to be in the final 8, the Elite 8 of the NBA. Is Elite 8 trademarked? If it is, please don't sue me, NCAA. The Final Four teams in each conference, like winning a playoff series, is the mark of a really good team. It obviously, rings culture and all that. We like want teams to be better than those things, but like you have to be really good. And I'm not sure Cam Reddish or Nas to this point have shown that. They both have these skills, and when they play at their peak, you're like, yes, those dudes could be like low-level starters. Those dudes could be really valuable six men. What's the plural of that? Bench contributors. They could both be high-end bench contributors, but then there's moments where it's like, okay, I don't get it with either of these gentlemen. There's like too inconsistent, too unreliable in terms of their production. Nassir Little's likely to be back. Like he's under contract for multiple years unless he's part of some sort of big offseason roster restructuring. And Cam Reddish could come back on the cheap. I think if both of them are at the end of your rotation, like if these are your 9th and 10th guys, they're wings with some with some skills and with some athleticism. And it's like, if you need to plug and play them on a team that is competitive in the regular season, no problem. Right? Like you could say like, hey, we need 9 minutes from Cam Reddish. That's not going to sink your team. You need 17 minutes from Cam Reddish. You need 17 minutes from Nassir Little. That's not going to sink your team in a regular season game. It's just, there are going to be nights when you wish they had a little bit more juice, and then they do. And I don't think either of them could be right now today penciled in to say, hey, these two guys are playoff level contributors. Here's the thing though. They're both very young. They're both, coming in with entering the first true. Nas isn't entering free agency because he chose not to, but Cam Reddish for the first free agency summer of his career as a restricted free agent. This is coming off their rookie deals. This is, young guys, spent 1 year in college, were very highly recruited high school players who have, a chance to get a lot better in the league. It's just, to this point, I don't think you could say either of them are like surefire high-level rotation players. Both of them are totally fine rotation players on a decent team. But if you're talking one of the really good teams in the league, they are going to have to improve. They need to take steps and be much more consistent in their production to feel better about it. I think I feel a little bit better about Nas because his engine runs hot, but I also think Nas's lows are lower, whereas Cam Reddish's lows are just quieter. It's like, I didn't notice him tonight. Whereas Nassir Little, you're like, oh man, that was a lot of mistakes. Oh, that was, it's a weird shot. It's bad defense, all of those things. I think his bad stuff is louder than Cam's bad stuff. So to answer Knuter's question, I don't know, take your pick. To answer Michael B's question, take your pick. Both of them, consistency is the struggle. Okay, couple more questions from listeners Zach and Jesse who ask about who's going to be back on the team next year. That's what we'll do in the third segment to close the show. Join me in that third segment, won't you? Still a pass first point guard. Still Mike Richmond. You are still listening to Locked On Blazers. Still rolling through a mailbag episode. If you want to get involved in the mailbag, lockedonblazerspod@gmail.com is the address to send your questions to. Zach has our next question. Zach asks, which Blazers starter is more likely to be on that's a collective pronoun, first collective pronoun of the mailbag. Which Blazers starter is more likely to be on our opening night lineup next season, Anthony Simons? Yusuf Nurkic? Both Anthony Simons and Yusuf Nurkic? Neither Anthony Simons or Yusuf Nurkic. Neither seems like neither. I guess I use them both interchangeably. Neither seems like the least likely of these. Then I will rank both as the next one. Then I will say Nurk, then Ant. I think Ant is the most likely to be on the roster next season because he's good. And the Blazers are in a position where Anthony Simons is their best trade chip. Not because I think he's like way better than Shaedon Sharpe. He is better than Shaedon Sharpe right now, but you pay for potential. Shaedon Sharpe's potential is through the freaking roof. He's looked darn good in the sort of like turn the keys over to him. It doesn't matter if you lose by 40 points part of the season. But, Ant has been more productive. He's a little bit older. He's been better in the league. I say that without controversy, I think. Trades are maybe based on potential versus production often when you're trading for young players. So like trade value is a little bit different, but like better every time is a better basketball player. It's, to me, uncontroversial opinion. So, but Anthony Simons remains the Blazers' best trade chip because of his talent, because of his age, 23 years old, because of his salary slot. He's making $25 million a year. To get good players who are being paid well, you're going to have to trade money. To make the money work, almost every big trade the Blazers would engineer would include Anthony Simons' money. But you can't just trade him to trade him. So, and he's good enough on offense such that, that you might not find a trade that suits what you want and you might run it back. I hope they don't. Like Dame plus little guards, it's just like at some point, punt in one direction, right? Like pick a lane. If you stay in this, like, we're doing it again, Damian Lillard plus an offensive minded guard under 6'4", it's like, okay, it's fine. You're not going to be terrible, but you're just like, there's like a natural ceiling on that type of roster construction. Anthony Simons, if the big trade happens, seems obvious. Yusuf Nurkic could be involved in that big trade, salary slot in that 18 million range. So you could trade for, you could get Nurk plus Nas plus picks plus, you could get to some money that works. But the biggest trades, like trading for a true star, almost has to include Ant just because of the money. But I also think the Blazers are, I think they would be more motivated to get off Nurk's money and head another direction just because Nurk's sort of level of production, he hasn't been bad, but it's just like he hasn't been, he's clearly he's like an NBA average center and he's kind of paid like a slightly above average center. He's not like, again, I think he's been a scapegoat for a lot of people this season. I don't think he's been that bad. He's just inconsistent and like the stuff he's bad at is really loud. It's really obvious. But he's a good pick and roll partner. When his engine revs hot, he can be really good. When he's playing hard, he's good. It's just the effort and the focus, mostly focus, I think, with Nurk, and the focus leads to his effort, for my money. So I think that's the issue. So I would say Nurk's like a little bit easier to trade because the money's worse and because he's just like not as good of a player. So you'd be willing to give up on him and go another way because you think he's probably more replaceable than Anthony Simons. But so I'll say Ant more likely, Nurk less likely. Both is then the like just Ant, just Nurk, both, and then neither. If I had to rank those, Zach. I'll be wrong about that. like as I finish this question, I feel pretty comfortable that I'm wrong about that. But that's why you ask the question, so you can say like, hey, but he said this, and then you can come back to the episode later and be like, you were wrong, Mike, you're an idiot. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Well, I get stuff wrong all the time, and I'm much more likely, if you're a long-time listener to the podcast, to kind of reheat my mistakes as I am to reheat my victories. Sometimes I get stuff right. I just don't feel the need to be like, I told you so, as much to be like, whoops, mea culpa on the stuff I got wrong. So, yeah, I feel like I'll be wrong about that one. I'll probably be wrong about this next one, too. A question from Jesse who asks, over under 8.5 players currently under contract that make next year's opening day roster. I'm going to cautiously take the under on this. I'll say I feel pretty comfortable the Blazers are going to do some roster restructuring next year, and based on the number of free agents they have, I'm going to say over under 8.5. I think 9 seems a little generous. They got 6 guys under contract for next season. Damian Lillard, Anthony Simons, Yusuf Nurkic, Shaedon Sharpe, Nassir Little, Keon Johnson. Those dudes are probably going to be back unless you make trades. Like I said, we mentioned the other one. Ant and Nurk could be very likely to be on other teams next year, likely to be traded. But I feel comfortable Dame's going to be back. Relatively comfortable Shaedon's going to be back, although we'll see what happens. Nas could be involved in trades. Keon could be involved in trades as like a throw-in to make the salary work. He doesn't have much trade value. But with those 6 dudes, you have 6 players under contract. Jabari Walker, Trendon Watford, both with non-guaranteed deals. Jabari Walker, like a lock to be back, unless he's part of a deal, but a lock to be back. You don't invest in a 20-year-old with a second-round pick and then say, okay, one season, he's no good. Like, you want him to play out a couple years and kind of figure out what it is. Trendon, I think he's certainly improved this year. I don't think he's like taking these massive step forwards, but I think he's an interesting player. I hope he's back. I like him. I'm just a fan of his game, even if I think he's imperfect at what he does. But I like weird players, and Trendon is a really weird player, so I hope he's back. That's 8 players that could be with just simple guarantees under contract. Jeremy Grant, Matisse Thybulle, Cam Reddish, Drew Eubanks, all free agents this summer. I think Drew is the least likely of those to come back, but it wouldn't surprise me. Another minimum deal for Drew Eubanks. He's to me, he's proven that he's a backup center. It's just when you ask him to play more than 15 minutes a night, what he struggles with gets exposed. And the Blazers were asking him to play way too many minutes this year. No fault of Drew's. He's like an energy dude off the bench who should play when the situation calls for itself. And the Blazers were like, you're our starting center for 6 weeks because we refuse to sign a tall person under any circumstances. We will not add a tall person to this roster. So help us, Brandon Roy or whatever. Yeah, I guess Drew could be back. It wouldn't surprise me if he's back. I think Matisse Thybulle and Jeremy Grant will be back. Jeremy Grant, basically the Blazers have backed themselves into a corner where they absolutely have to re-sign him. Letting him go does not create meaningful cap space to sign a player of his caliber. And if you didn't trade him at the trade deadline, it makes more sense to bring him back. So if you just add Grant into the mix, we're now at 9. Matisse Thybulle, I think, will be back because he's going to be relatively cheap and he fits a position of need. And it was, they traded some second round picks for him. He's got the right representation, the right agent. I think he'll be back. You throw him in the mix. We're at 10. Cam Reddish, I don't know, but seems like he would be a low risk signing. I think somewhere in the range of the minimum or slightly more than that. Like, not a bunch of money for Cam Reddish based on his production. I think the most likely deal for Cam Reddish is a 1-year minimum deal to prove it. Certainly there's places for him to get more money out there. I think Ryan Arcidiacono's gone. I think Justice Winslow's gone. The two-way guys, hard to know, but I think they'd be back on two-way. Like, John Butler Jr. and Abu Baji are not getting NBA deals next year. They're getting two-way deals again. So let's just ignore them because their two-way deals are not NBA contracts. So yeah, like, I'm comfortable saying I'm comfortable saying under, because if you look at Dame, Ant, Nurk, Shaden, Nas, Keon under contracts. You look at Jabari and Trendon under contract. You look at Grant, Matisse Thybulle, very likely to be re-signed. That's a full roster. But the Blazers were mediocre this year. And then when they weren't mediocre, they were worse than that. And then they pulled the plug to be awful on purpose. Something's got to give. This is bigger than Nino Brown. This is big business. This is America. They cannot run it back. They cannot run it back. So while they have all these players under contract, while they're very likely to re-sign some of the restricted free agents, or free agents in the case of Jeremy Grant, unrestricted, there's going to be too much roster movement for 9 of the same gentlemen to be back on this team. So while it would be very simple for them to run it back, very simple, just because the roster has it's like a simple path to return 9 of these folks as we just ran through. I think trades will demand trades around the draft, restructuring and free agency to get the space you want, or to make some moves you want to acquire players via trade or whatever it might be, or get the order of operations right so you can make some signings. I don't think the Blazers are going to be a cap space team. There's not a lot of sexy free agents out there this summer that would have it be valuable to have a bunch of cap space. So it's trade. The trade market is the path they go, and if you go the path of the trade market, you're very likely to change this up. So I'll go under 8.5 players. I like the line. Jesse. I think it's a really good question. I'll go under 8.5 players return next season. Okay, that's going to do it for today's mailbag. Apologies for this episode coming out a little bit late. Life gets in the way, but we still do 5 every week, wherever you get podcasts, also on YouTube. It's a weekday daily podcast. Some people have bullied me about calling it a daily podcast because I don't record on Saturdays and Sundays, so I'm cautious about calling it a daily show, but it's a daily show, y'all. I still believe it. So come back. We'll have more shows. Blazers play Friday evening against the Sacramento Kings. Probably see Shaq Harrison. Probably see Skylar Mays at least in a uniform and likely on the court because of the Blazers' health situation. Shaedon Sharpe probably going to go nuts this weekend. After this game, Blazers head out on the road for the final road trip of the season. Guess what? This show is going to be 5 days a week all summer long. Even as the Blazers season winds down, Locked On Blazers isn't going anywhere. So tell your friends about it. We've got a fun off season ahead. If you want to get involved, lockedonblazerspod@gmail.com is the address to send me a note to. Hit me up there. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.